discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. On April 6, Governor Bob McDonnell issued a proclamation declaring April Confederate History Month. Now, in and of itself, that's not surprising, considering Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. But what got everyone up in arms is that the proclamation made no reference to slavery at all. Now, was this an oversight, an attempt at revisionist history, or a slap in the face of Virginia's African-American community? Joining us to talk about it is Regina Malveaux, CEO of the YWCA-South Hampton Roads, and Cassandra Newby-Alexander, history professor at Norfolk State University. Welcome to the program. Regina, your first time here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Cassandra, welcome back.
Thank you.
368 words, the original proclamation. Not a word about slavery. How could that happen, Cassandra?
It was a revisit to the cult of the lost cause that we see emerge in the years following the end of the Civil War. From the time of the Appomattox battle, we would see some Confederate generals begin to actually go back on the whole idea that slavery was the cause, the primary cause of the Civil War.
So they would actually think that that was not the cause, or they were trying to change the reasoning behind their actions?
They were trying to change the reasoning, because once the war was just about over, then you're talking about a reconciliation process. And if you understand that racism really was a part of American society almost from the beginning, that when you look back on the laws of the colonies and the way that blacks were treated before the law or before courts, you would see that they were always treated unequally, that they were never given the same kind of judgment that whites were given. And so the end of the Civil War really symbolized this disconnect in American society, where half of the white population, not really half, but half of the nation that was seen as being dominated by these slaveholders, were suddenly faced with this notion that their rights would be secondary to those of African Americans. And that was a frightening thing for many people. And so the issue was, how do we reconcile our nation with a past? Well, we can't really if you include slavery, if you include this issue of race.
But to exclude it means that we're not looking at the full history. Wouldn't you agree with that, Regina?
Absolutely, absolutely. I taught a class last semester called African Americans in the U.S. Justice System, which very much focused on the law as it applies to African Americans, as has been applied to and against African Americans over the last 200 years. And Judge Higginbotham talked about just sort of the invisibility, and how even within the Constitution we saw that the word slavery was deliberately omitted, and that there was no specific reference made to slavery, sort of in an attempt to, justify what was being done.
The action without looking at the ugliness of the event.
Absolutely.
Now, Governor McDonnell took a lot of heat, and he did give some response to his actions. Our brethren over at WVEC caught him on tape. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
I thought that just having people look at the history, learning from the mistakes of the history, but understanding Virginia's role in the battlefields, etc., would be helpful for economic development.
Slavery was the controlling and central issue, and I don't know anyone who, with historical credence, would differ with that.
I didn't mention it solely because I was trying to keep the focus on really the war aspects of it.
Keep a focus on the war aspects.
I don't know how you can talk about the military aspect without talking about slavery. That was a big factor. At the start of the Civil War, you had African Americans who were enslaved, who were impressed into the Confederate military to build fortifications. Some of them were used as sharpshooters. And yet and still there were blacks who were trying to make their way to Union lines to offer up their service.
Because they could fight for on the Union,
right,
on the Union side. Now, Governor McDonnell went on to say, in his apology, he said that the proclamation issued by this office designating April as Confederate History Month contained a major omission. The failure to include any reference to slavery was a mistake, and for that I apologize to any fellow Virginian who has been offended or disappointed. Was that enough?
As a new Virginian, I was happy to see the apology. I will say it was certainly not enough for me. I work for an organization, the YWCA-South Hampton Roads, where our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. We are the local host for something called the Stand Against Racism.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, but that plays right into what you all are trying to eradicate.
Absolutely, and so I was glad to see we had actually extended an invitation to the governor's office to issue a proclamation for the Stand Against Racism, and had not yet heard back from his office. So I was delighted today to hear that the governor's office did actually finally respond to that request, and it appears has named May as Stand Against Racism Month, as I understand it. And so we're very much looking forward to working with him as an organization to maybe help bring some additional education on these issues.
And we'll talk about some other ways that people can get involved with Stand Against Racism in just a little bit. But you know, he also took some heat from one of his staunch supporters, Sheila Johnson, who was one of the co-founders of Black Entertainment Television, and she said, "I must condemn Governor McDonnell's proclamation honoring Confederate History Month and its insensitive disregard of Virginia's complicated and painful history, the remnants of which many Virginians still wrestle with today. The complete omission of slavery from an official government document which purports to be a call for Virginians to understand and study their history is both academically flawed and personally offensive. If Virginians are to celebrate their shared history, as this proclamation suggests, then the whole truth of this history must be recognized and not evaded." One of the things you all are going to be doing at Norfolk State, Cassandra, this fall is looking at the other side, if you will, of the history of the Civil War. Is that right?
Yes, and we really have to thank Governor McDonnell for even making this gaffe, because what it does is it draws attention, needed attention, to this whole issue about how we remember our past. We have a very short-sighted, convenient memory. In fact, I'm reminded in 1913, during a big Memorial Day celebration at Gettysburg, where Governor Mann, William Mann from Virginia, was there. President Woodrow Wilson was there, and Governor Mann said that, you know, that this painful history that this battlefield represented is a time when we really must share our focus on what we lost. And in essence, what he was saying, or what he was doing, was that the whole ceremony was about creating a shared myth about the past, so that we could make the past safe to look back and remember. And that's what American society has done. I'm reminded of when President George Bush, during the 2007 commemoration of Jamestown, made a statement that since 1776 we have all been free. And it was, of course it's not true, but it's a part of this safe past that this mythical past that we create, so that we don't have to deal with slavery. We don't have to deal with the genocide against the Indians. We don't have to deal with the concentration camps during the Second World War of the Japanese. We don't have to deal with all these things.
But if we forget about those things, I mean, it's kind of like the Jewish community that commemorates the Holocaust all the time, and their whole thing is, don't forget, so that it won't happen again.
Exactly.
So isn't that a danger that we face? That if we continue to erase or act like this part of our history didn't happen, that would be a problem?
Absolutely. I was stunned. I want to applaud WHRO for re-airing the Eyes on the Prize series right now. And in my class last semester, our students had an opportunity to view that series. And I was really surprised at how little this generation of young people are really familiar with and or connected to civil rights history that's, you know, just barely 50, 60 years old, let alone
what happened back in the Civil War, right?
Let alone the atrocities that carry us back a couple of hundred years. So I think it's really critical for these discussions to continue in a real and authentic way, and I really applaud your project because I think it's going to go a long way to help us in that regard.
Lisa Godley, our co-producer, had an opportunity to talk with Nikki Giovanni recently. She was here in Hampton Roads, and she had some things to say about the governor's proclamation also. Let's take a listen.
Oh, he's an idiot. Well, of course he had to apologize. The question is, what made him think in a 353-word statement that he could get away with it? Of course he had to. And if he wants to declare Confederate Month, I have no problem with that. Declare it. But teach the history, because the Confederacy was about enforcing slavery. Somebody needs to ask, and why would poor white boys die so that the master class can have slaves? There's the question. What makes poor whites dislike black people? What in the world have black people ever done to poor whites? Nothing. They worked for free, but if you didn't like that, then free them. We wouldn't have had a Civil War. And free them. I mean, there's so many questions. So I'm all in favor of Confederate. I'll put together a program for Confederate History Month. It's just going to be the truth.
Cassandra, I see you laughing. What do you think about Nikki's? She's feisty, isn't she?
Oh, she always has been.
Yes.
And to me, this is a wonderful teaching moment for the state. And for the nation. I would encourage everyone who can to, if they can, attend the conference on September 24th, 2010 at Norfolk State University in the L. Douglas Wilder Performing Arts Center, then go online and view the webcast. Or if you missed that, then purchase one of the DVDs that will be made, because Dr. James Horton, who is the professor emeritus from George Washington University, who is the chairperson for the panel.
And you're going to hear some from him on our show coming up in the next couple of weeks. So.
Yeah, I mean, he has pulled together a stellar list of scholars who have conducted all the research that I believe one of the representatives for the Sons of the Confederacy said needs to be done. Well, it's already been done. And these historians will talk about the myth-making of the Civil War. They'll talk about what actually happened during the Civil War. They'll talk about those who were part of the secession movement, what they said specifically about secession and why they were seceding. And it all had to do with slavery.
And well, let me ask you this first, then I don't want to lose this point. But we were talking before, and even the state of Virginia was divided in the secession movement.
Right.
In other words, the whole state did not want to succeed, did
Right,
it?
and that's part of the myth-making that has been done since Reconstruction ended here in Virginia. It was at the time of the secession discussions, which actually started in 1860. After South Carolina seceded in December of 1860, you began to see some discussions at the local level here in Virginia. And then, of course, they moved it to a statewide discussion and what ended up being a secession movement. And the part of Virginia that we call West Virginia refused to go along with Virginia. And so when Virginia voted to secede, the western part of the state voted to secede from Virginia and remain in the Union, and they were known as the Provisional State of Virginia throughout the Civil War. And not only that, but you had a large number of African Americans who were here in the state, both free and enslaved. And while those who were enslaved were forced in some cases to support the Confederacy, the moment they had an opportunity to run away, which they did, if you look at the whole history of Fort Monroe and how African Americans who were enslaved, began
part of the contraband.
Right, began to go to that fort asking for sanctuary. That was a big movement, and so it really highlighted how so many African Americans were not in support of the Confederacy even before, 2 years before Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, making this a war to either preserve or end slavery.
Now, he did add new language to the 368 words. And let's take a look at that language. It says, whereas as it is important for all Virginians to understand that the institution of slavery led to this war and was an evil and inhumane practice that deprived people of their God-given inalienable rights, and all Virginians are thankful for its permanent eradication from our borders, and the study of this time period should reflect upon and learn from this painful part of our history. Is that good enough?
It's a good beginning. It's a good beginning.
Okay. What do you think?
We haven't really acknowledged that our history of slavery and how much our government has actually supported it. We think of slavery, in fact, most textbooks even today, they don't start talking about slavery until they start talking about the South. When slavery was legal in every state, or every colony, and then later every state in this country. Will you consider that from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln, 72 years? Of those 72 years, 50 of those 72 years, the President of the United States was a slaveholder. And in the 22 years where the President was not a slaveholder, the President was only a one-term President.
So it was very much a part of this entire country, the way this country ran. As a matter of fact, it was the economic backbone. It was the only, well, you know, slaves were considered chattel, property. It was the only property that the federal government said it would protect. So it's only, now, you were telling us about a book that you were just reading from one of the panelists that are going to be on the show. Yes, David Blight, who will be here, and he... In his book, he stated that what McDonnell did, in essence, is it's not a surprise because he predicted this would happen. Yes, yes. In fact, the book is entitled Race and Reunion, looking at the Civil War through memory. And what he was essentially saying is that starting in 1875, the South has worked very hard in conjunction with the North to create this myth that we have this unifying past. And this past doesn't have anything to do with race. It doesn't have anything to do with slavery. It has to do with our freedoms. And so the initial proclamation that really heralded or returned this myth back to us is really all about trying to preserve that myth that we're all about freedoms. You know, they hate us for our freedoms kind of idea, when the reality is that our past is very complicated. And it's hard to put little boxes into our past. You need to look at the whole thing. Yes. Regina, when you hear people, you know, when Governor McDonnell was on the spotlight on a national basis, and you had Governor Haley Barbour, am I saying it correct? Yeah, I believe it's his name, from Mississippi. Who came out and said, what's the big deal? Why are they raising all that saying about that? You know, slavery was not a big deal. How do you react to that? It was dumbfounding to me as a Democrat to hear the governor of Mississippi. It's really, really, I'm a new resident of Virginia, a new and very proud resident of Virginia. I come here from San Diego, California, but I will say it was really sort of stunning to me when I sort of recognized, both through the governor's actions and just small things that I've picked up on regionally, how much of that ugly history still sort of remains. So in terms of treatment, in terms of racism, and nuances that are far more covert than they are overt, but present nevertheless. In fact, I was just speaking with one of my board members today, probably the most elegant, educated African-American woman I've ever known, and very much looking to her as a role model of who I want to be when I grow up. But she was just sharing with me earlier today sort of a road rage incident that happened to her on Saturday in a public library parking lot, where a gentleman got out and called her a long list of names which ended with the N-word. Had another board member, very talented African-American attorney, who had a swastika carved into her Range Rover as recently as a year ago. These are really, really surprising we would think in 2010
exactly
that we would not still be dealing with that. Let me ask you, since you're new to the area, and first of all, welcome to Hampton Roads.
Thank you. Love it here.
As the new CEO of the YWCA-South Hampton Roads, the whole idea about racism, stand against racism. What is it that you want people to do on April the 30th? WHRO is a part of this, but explain the program to us real quick.
Sure. Well, the YWCA-South Hampton Roads is a local sponsor of the Stand Against Racism, which is really a national effort that includes YWCAs in almost 40 states. 2 states have issued proclamations. I believe those states are North Carolina and Kansas. But really, it's up to a community and individual organizations, businesses, and individuals within a community to take a stand against racism and say, we acknowledge that racism still exists and that it is not to be tolerated or ignored. And so really it's a public awareness campaign. We're so grateful that WHRO signed up as one of our local participating agencies.
Yes, we have a big board in our lobby that has our proclamation saying that we stand against racism.
We're very happy to see that. And I know that locally we have about 50 organizations who've signed up to participate in some way. Everything from Virginia Wesleyan College, where they are really focusing on the Norfolk 17 and the time of massive resistance, to a local law firm who are hosting sort of a dialogue with their employees in the morning. And then I know that at some of our local program sites there are activities, and actually at the YWCA's administrative office we're hosting Dr. Kamara Jones, who really has started a national conversation around race, and really just hoping to further the dialogue and have these difficult discussions.
Okay. Ladies, we're just about out of time, but Cassandra, real quick, tell us again about where the conference is in September at NSU.
It will be at the L. Douglas Wilder Performing Arts Center, and actually admission is free. All you have to do is go to either the Norfolk State University website, the main page, or go to the Civil War Sesquicentennial page, and you will, of Virginia, and you'll find a link that will take you to the registration process. It's a free conference. It begins at, I believe, 8:30 in the morning. There will be 2 sessions, a morning and an afternoon session, and some fabulous lunchtime discussion sessions.
Okay. Ladies, thank you so much for talking with us about standing against racism. And I'm sure we'll have many other conversations to come. And when we come back, how one organization helps women dress for success. But first, here's what's happening in Hampton Roads. Looking for a job can be a scary experience, especially if you do not have the tools necessary to compete. Tonight, Lisa Godley introduces us to a local organization dedicated to making sure its clients not only know what kinds of questions to expect during a job interview, but also how to be dressed for success.
4 years ago, Gia Purcell decided that her life as a full-time hairstylist and makeup artist needed to change. In the midst of her transition from her old career to a new one, Gia was unemployed.
I found myself unemployed for about 4 months. One of the components of getting food stamps in TANF in those days was to go through a job readiness class.
As part of a job readiness program, Gia was referred to Dress for Success. Here, she got a lot more than a new suit for job interviews.
I came in and I was given interviewing tips. We discussed goal setting, and shortly, about 3 or 4 months after, I found a job. But I was mentored through the entire process. I had interviews, I didn't get jobs. They motivated me, well, don't worry about it, you'll have another lead, be encouraged. And I've been with them ever since.
Gia now works as the executive assistant to the general manager at the Sheraton Hotel in downtown Norfolk. She says she was only supposed to be there as a temp for 4 days, but she's been there 2 years now and attributes much of her success to the mentoring she received through Dress for Success.
Basically, each session is designed to help us build our professional careers, whether you're housekeeping, or grocery store clerk, but they're all designed to show, that where you start doesn't have to be where you stay.
Dress for Success opened its doors on Church Street in Norfolk 4 years ago. Since then, the program has helped close to 700 women transition into the workplace. Most of the women who come through the program are referred here by agencies like the Virginia Employment Commission or the Department of Human Services. Deborah Dandridge is co-founder of the Dress for Success program in Norfolk. She says each woman who comes here to be suited goes through a 20 to 30-minute interview coaching session. The one thing they try to reinforce to their clients is that when you're in an interview, 9 out of 10 times, it's usually all about you. So they try to teach them to be comfortable talking about themselves.
Believe it or not, some people have difficulty talking about themselves, even though they know themselves best. But getting them to open up, talk about what their strengths are, talk about what they bring. I often ask them, how would you do if there was a one-question interview? Why should I hire you? They're like, wow. And so you have to fill it in with that information on your experiences and why you feel that you should be given the opportunity to work for this company.
That's the first half hour of the program. The second half hour is spent here in the boutique, making sure they look the part.
We usually give them 2 choices of clothing, and they get to try on and pick out the suit that they feel the best in. Nothing is worse than to have someone tell you what you should wear if it's not what you feel that you should. We give them a lot of suggestions because a lot of the women have never had on a suit before. So this is where the fun happens in here. Because when they try on that suit for the first time, they really get to see it's like, wow, I didn't know I look so professional, or I didn't know I could look like this, and that's the fun part of it. Seeing the whole mindset change right in front of this mirror here.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And what a wonderful program. And also, I wanted to remind you now, if your company or you would like to get involved in Stand Against Racism, go to YWCA-SHR.org. And all the information is there on their website. And we thank you for joining us this evening. Please let us know what you think about the show by visiting our website, anotherview.tv. And you can also sign up for our e-newsletter. And we're on Facebook, so become a fan. Next week, the latest in treatment for prostate cancer. We'll see you next time for Another View.